Whenever you walk through a department store and you see that one aisle that's just all pink dolls and then the next one is all blue trucks,
Right.
or you read another report on the wage gap, or you see these huge political debates about who can use which public restroom,
Mm-hmm.
you can't help but ask, why? Why is our society set up like this? Why did these rules stick around?
That question, that feeling, is really the perfect way into sociology. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into the foundations of the field.
And we're going to use that sociological lens to look at one of the biggest structures out there,
Yeah.
gender.
Exactly. Our whole mission here is to give you the tools, the scientific tools, to really dissect how society's rules work.
So where do we even start? We need a framework, right? A tool to begin with.
We do. And the first tool is probably the most important one. It comes from C. Wright Mills, and it's called the sociological imagination.
It's the sociological imagination.
Mhm.
What is that really at its core?
It's an awareness. It's the ability to see the connection between your own personal story, your life, your choices, and the wider culture that shaped all of it.
It helps you tell the difference between a personal trouble and a public issue.
That's the key distinction. It helps you see that what feels like a personal problem is often part of a much bigger social pattern.
I think that's so important because the default is always to think about individualism. My choices are just my choices.
They are. I mean, take marriage. You feel like getting married is this deeply personal choice, right? It's about love. It's about who you connect with.
Of course.
But the sociological imagination asks you to pull the camera back, and suddenly you see that this personal choice is tied to these huge social patterns.
Like whether your relationship is even seen as legitimate by the law.
Exactly, or by your culture. It
Mhm.
shows you how these big institutions put limits on or, enable your private life.
So the individual and the society, they aren't two separate things. They're constantly shaping each other.
Inseparable. A sociologist named Norbert Elias had a great term for this. Figuration.
Figuration.
Yeah. You can't understand a social structure without figuring the individuals into it. We're all part of the machine, shaping it as it shapes us.
Okay, so to understand that machine, we need to know what it's made of. What are the essential building blocks for this discussion?
Well, first, we have to understand that we all live in a society. That's a group of people in a defined area who interact and, crucially, share a common culture.
And culture is what? The shared values, beliefs.
Shared practices, values, beliefs, and the norms. The unwritten rules about how to behave. And when those systems create negative impacts for a lot of people, we call that a social problem.
Like the wage gap we mentioned earlier.
Precisely. It's not just one person's bad salary, it's a pattern, a social problem.
And these norms, these rules, over time they become solid, right? They turn into what we call social institutions.
Yes. Think about things like the government, the family, the education system. They're these big, predictable arrangements that are designed to meet society's needs.
But they also create rules that limit what we can do.
They do. And all those institutions woven together, that's what we call the social structure.
Okay, so an easy way to think about it.
I always like the analogy of a human skeleton. It's the framework. It's long-lasting. It gives society its shape, and it limits what's possible.
The skeleton analogy makes it sound so rigid,
Yeah.
so permanent. How does that framework account for huge, rapid changes? I'm thinking of something like the civil rights movement or the fight for marriage equality.
That is a fantastic question. The skeleton is durable, for sure, but it's not unbreakable.
Right.
It can suffer major breaks. Or, and this is key, through collective will, through activism and political pressure, it can be fundamentally rebuilt, realigned.
So social structure limits what's possible, but it doesn't totally determine it.
It doesn't determine it, no. It just makes some outcomes way harder to achieve than others. And that's why the scientific approach is so important here.
Right, because we're not just talking about opinions. Some people hear social science and think it's all just anecdotes.
And that's a misconception we have to get past. Sociology is an evidence-based discipline. It uses the scientific method. You form a hypothesis, you gather data, you analyze it.
And from that, you get what? Not laws like in physics.
No, not at all. You get generalizations, and the difference is crucial for you to understand.
Okay, so what is it?
The law of gravity is a hard and fast rule. It always works. A generalization is a statement of tendency.
So an example would be?
The data might show that people from high-income neighborhoods tend to get more years of education. It's a pattern, a probability.
But it's not a guarantee for any one person.
Not at all. It just tells us where the pressures are, where the advantages lie. Using that scientific method helps us reduce our own biases from, personal experience or what we think is common sense.
It gives us real confidence in the patterns we're seeing.
Exactly.
Okay, so now that we know we can trust the data, let's apply this to probably the most fundamental social institution there is, the family. The patterns of change there are. I mean, they're undeniable.
Oh, they're huge. We are absolutely moving away from any single definition of a typical American family.
We're seeing more unmarried couples, more single-parent households.
Blended families, same-sex couples. It's a total transformation.
The census data on this is really striking. I think it was from 2020. Something like 15 million mothers and 3.5 million fathers are raising kids alone.
And that doesn't even count all the other family structures, people building families outside of traditional marriage. The old structure is definitely shifting.
And when it shifts, the old invisible rules suddenly become visible.
They do. And that forces us to talk about something called heteronormativity.
That's a big word. Break that down for us.
It's the everyday, totally taken for granted way that heterosexuality is seen as the default, the normal. It's privileged in our culture.
It's so normal you don't even see it.
You don't. A great example, a sociologist named Karen Martin found that parents routinely assume their kids are heterosexual from as young as 3 or 5 years old. They talk to them about who they'll marry, and it's always assumed to be someone of the opposite sex.
Wow, so it's baked into the script of just growing up.
It is, and that gets at Adrienne Rich's concept from 1980, which is compulsory heterosexuality.
Okay, so how is that different?
She argued it's not just a preference, it's a whole system of oppression.
Right.
It's the way society basically denies people sexual self-determination by presenting one model heterosexuality as the only acceptable option.
And it's compulsory because all the institutions work together to enforce it.
All of them. The political system, religion, the legal system, family expectations. They all interlock to privilege that man-woman pairing.
And you can really see the impact of that when you look at the legal struggles for LGBTQIA+ people. The birth certificate issue is just mind-blowing.
It is. The fact that until a Supreme Court ruling in 2017, many states wouldn't even allow both same-sex spouses to be on their own child's birth certificate.
That is a perfect example of institutional resistance.
It is, and it's still happening. Many states today still have laws on the books that allow for discrimination in adoption and foster care based on sexuality.
These aren't just individual biases. These are rules built right into the skeleton.
They are, and this brings us right to the heart of it, the sociology of gender.
So if these social structures are creating all these rules, how does sociology actually define gender? How is it different from biological sex?
Sociology defines gender as everything that a culture attaches to a person based on their sex assigned at birth.
So it's the attitudes, the behaviors, the expectations.
All of it. It's the roles and norms a society associates with being masculine or feminine. The key phrase here is socially constructed.
And what's so wild is that our Western idea of a strict gender binary, male or female, and that's it, that's not universal.
Not even close. That's one of the most important findings from anthropology. If you look at many indigenous cultures, you find terms like burdick or two-spirit.
And those refer to people living outside that binary.
Yes, individuals who fulfill different social and spiritual roles. Or you look at Samoan culture, which has long accepted a third gender, the Fatafine.
Which means the way of the woman.
Right. They're biologically male, but embody both masculine and feminine traits, and they are an accepted, integrated part of the society. These examples just prove that our gender rules are completely dependent on the society we live in.
And in our society, the foundation for gender inequality is a system called patriarchy.
Patriarchy is the system where men, as a group, hold structural power. And it's not just about men holding power, it's that characteristics associated with masculinity are valued more highly.
Even traits we admire in women, like being empathetic or nurturing.
They're often valued less, especially in the economic or political world, than traits seen as masculine, like being aggressive or decisive. That's why gender difference is almost always linked to gender inequality.
And we absolutely cannot talk about patriarchy in the U.S. without talking about how it intersects with race. This isn't just one simple system.
No, it's a complex, racialized hierarchy. The historical record is just brutal on this.
In what way?
Well, for Black men, patriarchy was twisted to hypermasculinize and hypersexualize them, creating this racist trope of the threat.
Right. And for Black women?
They were often cast as the opposite, hypermasculinized, seen as the antithesis of fragile white womanhood. And horrifyingly, stereotypes from that era, like the idea that they feel less pain, still affect their healthcare outcomes today.
And you see other different patterns for other groups. For Asian American men, historically, a pattern of demasculinization, right?
Yeah.
Stereotypes of being weaker.
Yes, and for Asian American women, the opposite. A hyperfeminization, portraying them as submissive objects. It just shows that the rules of patriarchy are filtered through race. They don't apply to everyone in the same way.
Which explains why the field itself had to change over time. It didn't start as the sociology of gender, did it?
No, not at all. It started as the sociology of women.
Why only women?
Because men were seen as the default human, the norm. In law, in work, in politics, women were the other, the group that was specifically experiencing all these inequalities. The term gender role didn't even exist until 1955.
So the big shift really happened in the 60s and 70s with the rise of feminist theory. I'm thinking of books like The Feminine Mystique.
That was a huge turning point. But it didn't really become the sociology of all genders until the late 80s and 90s. That's when scholars started to seriously study masculinity, too.
That seems like a really important move.
It was crucial. You had concepts like doing gender from West and Zimmerman, the idea that gender is something you perform every day.
It's not just who you are, it's what you do.
Exactly. And scholars like R.W. Connell and Michael Kimmel brought masculinity into the frame, and the whole field opened up.
Okay, so we've got the science, we've got the social structures, we've defined gender and patriarchy. Now, for the practical part, the tool you can actually use, this is gender analysis.
Right. Gender analysis is the process. It's actively looking at any situation, a relationship, a social problem, access to resources through the lens of gender.
But to do that right, you need what is maybe the most powerful concept in sociology today.
You absolutely do. You need intersectionality.
A term from legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw back in 1991. If someone is trying to wrap their head around this, what is the single most important thing to know about intersectionality?
Simultaneity, the idea that all the parts of your identity, your race, class, gender, sexuality, age, ability, they don't work one at a time.
They're not separate boxes.
No. They overlap and influence each other at the same time to create these really complex, unique experiences of power or oppression. The Venn diagram analogy is useful, but imagine the circles are all woven together.
So you're never just received as a woman. You're received as a white woman, or a black woman, or a working class woman. And each of those experiences is different.
That's it, exactly. A white woman and a black woman might both be affected by the gender wage gap, but their race shapes the way they experience that discrimination and often the size of the gap. Without intersectionality, you are only ever seeing part of the story.
Which brings us back to the big question.
Yeah.
Why should you, our listener, care about learning these tools? Why does this matter?
Because it validates your experiences. If you've ever felt like you're swimming against some invisible current, sociology provides the data to prove that the current is real.
So it's not just in your head. The wage gap isn't just an idea.
No, it's confirmed by decades of statistical and qualitative data. This kind of study also helps us identify what we call institutionalized discrimination.
The idea that the exclusion is built into the system itself.
Right. It's in the norms and values of our institutions. So you realize that maybe your struggle to get a promotion isn't a personal failing. It might be a systemic barrier.
And that recognition is where the power is.
It's so empowering because it shifts the problem from being your personal pain to being a collective issue that needs a collective solution.
When you see the pattern that lots of people like you are facing the same microaggressions or the same barriers, you can organize.
Shared struggle creates power, and that's what fuels activism, whether it's voting or joining groups like the HRC or the ACLU or just pushing for change in your own workplace. It's how we dismantle those discriminatory policies.
So the structure is tough, but it's not set in stone.
Persistent, but not immutable.
Okay, so what's the takeaway? We started this whole deep dive with these, these simple questions about toy aisles and paychecks. And we've ended by giving you 3 really powerful tools: the sociological imagination, gender analysis, and intersectionality, to not just answer those questions, but to prove that the patterns you see are real and need to be addressed structurally.
And we want to leave you with a final thought, a challenge, really.
Okay, let's hear it.
Start applying this gender analysis to the media you see every single day. Think about advertising. You see these big campaigns like that Absolute vodka ad with the gay proposal at a game, or Coors Light with the slogan, "Out is refreshing."
On the surface, they look super inclusive, right?
progress. They do. But now you have the tools to look deeper. So you should ask yourself, are they really challenging the structure? Or are they just reinforcing old dynamics in a new package?
Hmm.
When you see LGBTQIA plus people being hypersexualized in an ad, is that real inclusion? Or is it just another stereotype? When a company says it supports diversity, does it still promote a single dominant, sometimes toxic idea of masculinity?
Even if the men in the ad are gay men.
Even then, so the challenge is this. How do you evaluate whether an ad or a policy at work or even just a conversation is genuinely equitable? Or is it just the same old power structure with a new coat of paint? That's the ongoing, essential work of the sociology of gender.